Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue with this week's theme of two-parters, exploring songs that have a part 1 and a part 2, listening to them in close proximity of each other and exploring what they do with the two-part structure. We have listened to one song earlier, or actually two songs earlier this week, where the songs rolled right into each other, where one was simply an prelude to the other. And then we listened to one a couple days ago where the two songs were very distinct, showing up on completely different albums. Here we are seeing a third situation where the songs are split between an album opener and an album closer. We are looking at Dream Theater's In the Presence of Enemies off of their Systemic Chaos album. As I mentioned, part 1 is how the album begins, part 2 is how the album ends. We're looking at over 20 minutes of music here, so let's get into it. Waste not another second and find out what Dream Theater is bringing to the table today. Very rush on that synth. Actually, even that melody was very rushy. Yeah, so we have a 7/4 idea here, or probably 7/8, easier to understand. Ooh! Yeah, those closed hi-hats, back to back, oh, that is so clever. So we shift to 9 here. Yeah, that's a fun little lick there. I like the percussive element on whatever patch they're using on the keyboard. Very tense. Definitely feels like enemies surrounding. The drums and bass providing us our rhythmic information against the consistency of those 16th notes on the guitar. Pulling it back to a much slower 4/4. Allowing us to find a little bit of levity within the chaos. Yeah, I really dig the melodic writing here. The bass backing up the guitar line. The arpeggiating keyboard. So from our first section to our second, we slowed it down, but from our second to third, we hit the brakes. Oh. Okay, we're building something out of this. Ooh, no. So we got 3 bars of 7 and a bar of 5. 14 and 12 is 26. It's really interesting phrasing. Into a very steady, hard 3/4. Yeah. Bringing the levity. What is going on here? Bringing the rhythmic nature back with the palm muted guitars after the really big section we just had. Really nice contrast. Promising salvation, a resurrection for a fallen man. Do you still wait for your God? I love how they had the super progressive intro and then a very standard like hard rock sound here. I think Dream Theater does a really good job of balancing their more progressive tendencies with very palatable sounds. Yeah, the synth layering on the octave harmony on the vocals. And this is the intro, right? I was forgotten, a body scorned and broken, my soul rejected, tainted by his blood. Down redemption, a sinner not worth saving, forever taken from the one I loved. Do I still wait for my God? And the symbol of my faith, I can lead to death. That was interesting. The dotted quarter. Bringing the arpeggiations back. Really cool polymeter going on here. Yeah, harmonized shred always sounds good. Yeah, it's like shredded cheese. It's always best when you blend multiple flavors. When you got a good shred going on in the guitar, add some harmony to it. Put another shredding guitar in there. It's always going to be good. Now see, that's peculiar. Does that ending go into track 2 or does it go into Part 2, which is like 10 tracks later. I guess we'll find out later if we begin with any of that wind. But yeah, I mean, so like we've covered some Dream Theater on this channel, and this is a lot of what I think Dream Theater does well. I'm going to try not to repeat too much of what I said in the past, but I think it's been a couple of years since we've checked out some Dream Theater as well, so I honestly don't know what I've said about them before. But as far as my mental file on what kind of music Dream Theater makes, I don't really feel like there's anything in here that is different than what I would praise for them in any other song of theirs. As I mentioned during the reaction, one of the things that I absolutely love about Dream Theater is that they do a fantastic job of pairing the more progressive writings that they have with very easy to follow, somewhat traditional writing once we get into the meat of a song. It may just be the few Dream Theater tracks that y'all have had me listen to so far, but this has been a consistent thing I've heard. They do have more esoteric elements in some of their sections, usually within bridges, but once we hit a verse chorus segment, they're usually rather straightforward, not always working within a standard 4/4 time signature, but creating something that has a strong sense of groove to it, where even if you aren't sure about the complexities of something going on, you can still enjoy the core element, where I feel like some of their more esoteric instrumental sections are not always that. Particularly, we can see things on the extreme end of this spectrum with Dance of Eternity. Is that what it was called? Um, but whenever the vocals are present, I think in a majority of Dream Theater tracks I've listened to, these tend to feel very standardized. We'll put it that way. I don't think that they're always things that you could find in other rock or metal bands, but they tend to be things that would be a lot more palatable than their more progressive elements. And we see that very strongly here. We have a full, like, 5 minutes of this hyper progressive writing at the beginning. Really cool harmonies, really cool note intervals, wild layering, polyrhythms, wild time signatures. It's progressive on every level of the composition. And then the vocals come in, and it's like a straightforward hard rock track for a while. And I don't know how people feel about this. To me, it almost feels like a reward at times. The progressive elements are usually pretty cool. I had a lot of positive things to say about it during the reaction itself, but getting to the first verse, the meat of the song, it feels like, where things simplify and they kind of get down to just the meat and potatoes of things. This is sort of feeling like a reward. I got through the hyper complex stuff. Now it's time for something that is just surface level engaging, something that feels good to listen to, that I can kind of turn my brain off and just enjoy. Like I said, I don't know if all listeners kind of view it like that. In fact, I'm sure there are some Dream Theater fans who don't prefer the simpler writing of theirs and might only enjoy the instrumental bits on their albums. But that's sort of how I feel about it. Not saying that any one element is better than the other, but there's certainly one that I click with a lot better, one that makes more sense to me. And it could just be one of those things that I don't think there's many Dream Theater songs that I've listened to more than once. Panic Attack? Is that what it's called? That doesn't sound right. Maybe it is, though. That song, it showed up on a Rock Band game like decades ago, and I've heard that song quite a bit. But I think that's the only Dream Theater I've had repeat listens on, and none of it outside of the game itself. So it might be one of those things where the more complex parts just make more sense on repeat listens as I can familiarize myself with the oddities of it, whereas the hard rock sections in this song are more straightforward and more easy to digest on a first time listen. I don't know, there's a lot of things that can go into it, and of course, many of them are subjective. So, like I said, I don't know if other people feel that way, but it tends to be how I approach Dream Theater. With that said, the opening is very complex in a lot of cool ways. It's one of the things I like about Dream Theater 2, not just that they have these two ends of the spectrum that they swing between, but that even on their complex side, they are digestible in a lot of ways. I don't think there's anything in the first 5 minutes of this song that would turn away people. It's a little difficult to groove to at times, but for the most part, it is something you can just enjoy. Maybe you won't necessarily like it enough to give it a second listen, but I think there are very few metalheads who would straight up turn it off. I could also be very, very wrong in that. That's kind of the notion I get about it, though. And it's because they find this fine line between accessibility and progressive tendencies. Are there chord progressions you don't normally hear in metal? Sure. Are there note intervals you don't necessarily hear in metal too often? Yeah. Is the time all over the place? Are the rhythmic elements bonkers? Yes, 100%. But it's all done in a way that I feel is approachable. It isn't as deep as classical music can get harmonically. It isn't as complex as free jazz can be, or any sort of avant-garde type of music. It does have its feet firmly planted in a side of accessibility. And it, at the end of the day, no matter how wild or complex they try to make their music, they also always end up on having an element of it that just sounds cool as far as metal's rule of cool goes. Even if this melody for the guitars at the beginning is difficult to follow, it's still a killer guitar riff at the end of the day, and maybe I can't bob my head to it, but it still sounds cool. And that, I think, is where Dream Theater excels. It's why they have become this household name. I'm sure there's some historic stuff to it. Dream Theater is one of the older prog metal groups, and being the first to the pitch definitely helps a bit, but there's also something about their writing that gives them staying power. And I think a lot of it comes down to this accessible progevity. That's not a word. Accessible progressiveness. Progevity. What even is that? And a lot of it comes down to the way that things sound and the way that they groove. Um, where was I going with all this stuff? How did I get on this topic? The opening section. Yeah, there's some wild time stuff in here. I mean, y'all saw me try it my hardest. I'm usually pretty good at picking up time signatures, and to my credit, I picked up a couple, but I also think that Dream Theater is changing their time signature quite a bit, where one 2-bar phrase or even a 4-bar phrase can have a very different length than the next 2 or 4-bar phrase. And so while I might pick up, oh, we have a 7 and then a 5, the next time might be a 7 and then a 6. And it makes it really difficult to catch on to the large picture at hand. They don't like to sit still, is what I'm trying to say here. But they do so in a way that, again, feels right. It's still kind of easy to follow along. It's not too chaotic. And again, it's finding that middle ground, accessibility, progressive tendencies. And they do a fantastic job with it. Now, it's not just time, though, that they play around with. We also have some really cool instrumentation here. We have the keyboard, for instance. And the keyboard, maybe there's multiple keyboards. I look at live footage of bands that use keyboards, and they usually have like 3, 4, 5 keyboards, right? But at the end of the day, I'm just going to say they have different sounds to them. Maybe it's one keyboard, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 15. I don't know. But they have a lot of different sounds coming out of their keyboard, and I like the frequency of change we get on this. And we hear this in other bands too. Pretty much anytime you have a keyboardist, they're going to jump around between sounds, no different than a guitarist would go to their floor pedal, foot pedal, and change some settings to move between lead tones and rhythm tones and solo tones. But here, I mean, the dude played like 4, 5, 6 different keyboard tones within the first 5 minutes of the song. And I love that contrast, the dynamic quality of it. While the rest of the instruments are fairly flat in their variety. We'll put it that way. The guitar tone doesn't really change much until we get into that first verse. The bass never changes at all. The drums don't change at all. We don't have vocals, so we don't have anything like that. It's really the keyboard that keeps the song feeling fresh, at least in the melodic area of things. The drums do change up their patterns, the guitar riffs do fluctuate, the bass does change what they're playing, but that's all compositional. The sound of the song doesn't change, it doesn't fluctuate at all. And so for this 5 minute segment, they try to keep this one tonal thing moving. And to me, it helps what keeps pushing the song forward. It gives us new voices within the track, new timbres for the melody to be played on. And it allows the song to feel a bit more dynamic. And I think it's a small little spice that completely changes the entire soup here. The opening of this track, I think, could get a little old if the keyboardist wasn't changing up their tone as often as they did. And I think that is a huge thing. It's here's the thing, right? You take a mid band and like top tier, and you know what the real difference is going to be? Minutia. It's going to be the little things that they see, the little additions they have. It's what makes Dream Theater a much better band than some of their contemporaries, because they might have a demo of this where the keyboardist never changes their keyboard tone, where the guitars don't change their tone up much at all either. Although I think the guitarist only changed their tone up from the intro to the verse and chorus, because we had that really fat, large guitar tone, and then we had the palm muted stuff on like the second verse. And so there were some timbre shifts there, but I don't think we had any in the first 5 minutes. But there might be a demo out there where they didn't change the keyboard up much. And maybe it felt a bit flat. It lacked that dynamic writing. And they had the ear to say, okay, this is good, but it could be a little bit better. And it's that little bit that's going to edge them out and push them over their contemporaries. And it's bands like Dream Theater. The reason they're so big is because they can see those little changes that need to be made. At least to me, like I said, the shift in keyboard tones is a small spice that really elevates this meal. Now, speaking of contrast, we have all these progressive writings in our first 5 minutes. And then we throw all of them out the window and bring in some 4/4, 4 on the floor, I think it was. It's a very steady beat from the drums. The bass kind of shifted away from their more melodic writing into something a bit more foundational. The keyboard was kind of missing at times, right? We had the arpeggiation, and then the quick rising thirds, but then I think there were also sections where the keyboards didn't play anything at all in the verse. The guitar went to a very Rule of Cool riff style. It moved away from the linear melodic writing we had in the first 5 minutes into a repeating lick. We just really focused things down, paired off all the fat, and got to a very distilled version of Dream Theater. And I think it is wild to listen to those swings. And again, that huge contrast is one of their best strengths. That's not to say that this is entirely simple. There are some moving ideas. Again, we have the arpeggiation from the keyboards. We have the rising thirds on the keyboards. There are ideas in here that bring in some more progressive elements. And of course, when we get to the chorus, we get back to some wild time signatures. But this verse just simplifies everything. It is groovy. You just want to move your body to it. I'm pretty sure I had some sort of like, one of those metal faces. I don't know what was going on there. I was just grooving to it. It was a good time. After my brain was fried on the first 5 minutes, it said, okay, your brain's broken. We'll give it a rest. We'll give it time to reboot. Here's something you don't need your brain to enjoy. And that's just something I really love about Dream Theater. Of course, after this, we had the bridge into the outro, and a lot of this built on either of the first two ideas. So I don't think I have anything new to say about those, though I do enjoy, once again, their melody writing that I talked about as far as the solos on the guitar and the keyboard highlights that they had. I just love their melody writing. Always have. I think they do a great job at writing stuff that is interesting to listen to. It's also tasteful, but they know how to shred and they have the skill to back that up as well. Normally, around this time, I would begin to talk about theme. What is the song trying to do? What is it trying to say? I'm not entirely sure on this one. The two styles of writing are so distinct and they're doing two very different things that it's difficult to see how they meet in the middle. What does it mean that the song goes from wild time signatures to a static one back to wild ones? What does it mean that we have a more orchestral, a symphonic style of writing at the beginning of the song, utilizing a wider array of timbres and more melodic styles of lead writing versus the riff and lick based style that we have in the verse and the chorus, where even the vocals, being the lead instrument, have a repeating melody under the words. It becomes very cyclical at that point. Is that anything I should look into, or is it, as I stated earlier, just their style to go from something more complex and progressive to simpler ideas? Harmonically, it's even difficult to pair all this together because we had vastly different, wider harmonic ideas in the beginning of the song that explored freedom and fluidity. Whereas once we hit the more lick based stuff, it was just rule of cool. It sounded awesome, but what does that mean narratively? And so, like with a lot of progressive music, I don't really have a strong grasp on the narrative of the song. It's a lot easier when a song is atmospheric based, when it's just straightforward rock or metal, or even more of the extreme metals like black metal, which tends to wear its emotions on its sleeve. Progressive music in general is just difficult to get a grasp on through a first time listen. So I'm kind of curious what the lyrics are here. The album's called Systemic Chaos, and I try not to pair album an album to musical themes too often because they don't necessarily have to line up. But I do find that the more progressive elements in here are exceptionally chaotic. I could not pick out time signatures in so many places. That is chaos to me. But there is a pattern to it all. I was beginning to unlock things. Some of the sections changed just right before I could unlock what was going on, but I was beginning to piece things together. It is ordered. Chaotic sounding, sure, but underneath? No, everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. There's a very strong sense of order to it. Systemic chaos is definitely how I would describe the opening and ending of this song. But then the track is called In the Presence of Enemies. And as I mentioned, the very beginning, when we had our atmospheric start to the song, before we got into any of the more progressive writing and the melodic writing that we did have this one texture, which was super tense in the chords. We had some dyads coming in from the guitars, and they were two notes that were just clashing in sound. And it was just this rising idea of clashing harmony. That did sound like being surrounded by danger, not just any danger, but an increasing amount. The volume and the pitch increased as the time of the song went on, which felt like we were being more and more surrounded by enemies, so to speak. I thought that worked really well, but I can't say there was any other part of the song that made me think specifically about this topic. And it could just be, at the end of the day, that Dream Theater wrote a Dream Theater song that has nothing to do, for the most part, with the title or with their lyrical themes. But let's dive into those, speaking of, and see what the song is about lyrically before we move on into part two. First, we're going to start with the lyrical dive, and then we're going to have some fun history with Bryan. This is a wild rabbit hole I went down. But, like I said, first, lyrics. This song speaks about a person who was full of sin, as stated. Dang, what was his second verse? Yeah, he says he's beyond redemption, a sinner not worth saving, forever taken from the one that I loved. So they were ripped apart from their loved ones, and they felt that they had so much blood on their ledger that there was no way they could ever find redemption. But they do. There is someone or something that says, I can free you from this hell and misery, and you should never be ashamed. I'll give you power beyond anything as long as you serve me. It says, you'll be the chosen one. All I ask is you worship me, and I will give you eternal life and help you seek the revenge that you want. And that's how this starts. We meet this character, find out that they don't have a good view of themselves, they are dead in hell possibly, and they decide to take on this person's this power in return for eternal servitude so that they can get revenge on those who wronged them in their life. On the surface, we've heard stories like this even inside the realm of metal before, but what makes this peculiar is that this song wouldn't exist without a little video game called Duke Nukem 3D. And you're probably thinking, what? So a little bit of history with Bryan. This song is based off of a Korean comic book called Priest, which I actually found out was loosely adapted into an American film called Priest in the early 2010s, starring Paul Bettany. And I'm pretty sure I watched that movie when it came out, and I don't remember anything about it other than it was like cowboys and Christians, religious visuals, and vampires, I think, werewolves, I don't remember. It was like, some priest guy with guns who killed supernatural dudes. And Paul Bettany was the main character. And it was loosely adapted from this Korean comic book. The same Korean comic book that influenced Dream Theaters in the Presence of Enemies. It is about a person named Ivan who dies and meets the demon Belial. And Belial gives him his own power and resurrects him into this undead being so that he can go and get revenge on the 12 angels and win back his love or something like that. I got a really quick synopsis on Wiki about it. But yes, so this concept right here is the initial element of the story. We have our main character, they meet a demon, the demon grants them power and immortality to go back and get revenge. That is the foundational plot of the comic Priest. While I was on the Wikipedia page for Priest, and I found out about the American adaptation later, I also found out that after writing the third volume, the author did a Q&A and mentioned that Priest was heavily adapted from a 1997 video game called Blood by Monolith Studios, I think is right, which is also a supernatural, gothic horror, cowboy mix of stuff. We didn't really have anything like that at the time in the first-person shooter realm, and it was pretty cool. It was very different for me, but what's interesting about it is that it's built on the Build engine, which Ken Silverman made for Duke Nukem 3D after he joined 3D Realms. And so, yeah, that whole series of events, Dream Theaters, this two-part song here would not be around. I mean, well, okay, maybe that's a bit far-fetched. Maybe Monolith still would have made Blood just on the Doom engine, maybe. But, I mean, that's not how history went. So, I don't know. I was just like, every time I clicked on something, I was like, wait, it's tied to this? Wait, that's tied to that? What? And it was just like, I don't know. It was bizarre for me to continue to see all of the nodes connecting these two Dream Theater songs to so much history across multiple cultures. I don't know. I think that's wild. Anyways, you know, we still have another half of this video. We have an entire other song to check out. So we should probably get going because we're already at like 36, 35 minutes on this video as it is. Let's dive into In the Presence of Enemies Part 2 and see where they decided to take this idea going forward. And remember, there is an entire album of music between these two parts, but I'm still going to be listening to see if maybe there is part of that outro from the first one in the introduction of this one. Let's dive into it. I would say yes. Interesting decision. I'm curious if track 2, if part 1 moves into track 2 well, and the track before this one moves into this one well, and it's just, they made sure that everything had flow, but that these two pieces, if you put them together, would also flow well. That would be a cool detail. So I'm getting like a 6/8 here, but you could easily do 1, 2, 3, 4. Have a really slow 4/4. But I think it's because the delay on the... We have the hit, and then on a 3 is where the reverb comes in. Tons of tension, just really setting a stage for this. Isolating as well, there's not a lot going on. Oh, just the slightest tempo increase, this large bass coming in. Ooh, the shifting phrasing. Yeah, so we have 4, and then 4, and then 4, and then 5, which gives us that delayed re-entry on the phrase. So alternating 8 and 9. Yeah. The strings and the vocals rising up over the heaviness and the weight of the guitar work. Yeah. Yeah. You know what's cool is I mentioned this on the first part too, of the keyboard being an octave above the vocals, giving it this really wide harmony. They're doing it again. There's the really big sound against the palm muting. It's a very different song, but they're utilizing so many elements. It ties the two tracks together very well. Yeah, so every 2 bars, our root note was rising on the guitar riff. Very cool idea. I thought we were restarting the chorus over a little bit. I was a little disappointed with that. But moving into this, yeah, that was actually a really good bait and switch there. Oh, a really interesting rhythmic shift on that vocal melody. With those staccato da 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 da. So it's driving in every element and the vocals are leading it, which is very cool. Yeah, and the guitar sitting on that one note. See if we go back to that. Yeah, we don't. Yeah, the guitars were sitting on one note though, alternating the wild movement with this rigidity. A variation on right here, this is what I'm talking about. All the movement, and then back to, well, here. It's also a really great use of larger sounds versus smaller sounds to create space for the vocals. Okay, there's so much empty space here, the vocals can be clearly heard. Ooh. There we go again. 6665. It's an inversion of the 4445 we had earlier, removing a beat instead of adding one. And here it does feel like we stumble into the next section rather than feeling like we're waiting for it to happen. There's that really percussive keyboard work again. That's a wild timbre though. Is that the bass making that twangy sounds? Like distorted twang. This is a very Panic Attack right here. I hope that's the name of this song. Ooh, fun modulation. Yeah, pushing from the offbeat to the downbeat on the drums completely shifts the feeling of that. Oh, that was a rough shift. Interesting sci-fi sounds. Feelings of bittersweet victory. there's a sense of completion to this finality, but there's also negativity built into it as well. Like that inversion, instead of completing to the resolution of that progression, we hit something that undercut all of that energy. Bringing back the arpeggiation from the first track, but with strings instead of the keyboard. Very theatric. I could see this at the end of a rock opera. Yeah, dude, the vibrato. Of course. There's the resolution. Okay. Okay, that's still digesting it, you know. So there's a lot from my breakdown of the first track that I think is applicable here as well. Their ability to be palatable and wildly progressive, the ways that they bring complexity and simplicity together, the ways that they, even when they make things complex, there's still a palatability and a listenability to it all, an accessibility to their writing. I think all of that shines through here as well, and I don't want to repeat myself too much as we're already working on an hour here, and I haven't gone through the lyrics yet. We're probably looking at a 90-minute video. But I do want to touch on a couple of things that I did like about this song that was unique to it. One of the first things I noticed was that the intro was reminiscent of the first track's intro. It was one idea. I think it was the drum pattern or something about the intro. I was like, oh wait, that kind of reminds me of the other track. And then somewhere in the middle of this song, like 8 minutes in, 7 or 8 minutes in, I said, wait, this is the intro to track 1. And I really like these little callbacks. They're actually all over the place. There is a vocal melody that comes in that was from the first one, but they're usually not used in a one-to-one fashion. For instance, when that vocal melody came in, I don't think the rest of the music copied what was going on from the first track. It was just that melody. It had been recontextualized within a new part of music, reutilizing the same melody. Same thing with that drum rhythm, is one part of a section that was similar, not necessarily the entire part brought completely over into the new song. And so what we end up getting is variations on and recontextualizations of motifs that we had heard in the first part. It is a beautiful way of pairing the two songs together, of showcasing where they sit together without reutilizing any of the aspects one-to-one, so that there isn't any copy pasting being done, but there are threads being put between the two of them. I thought that was masterfully done, and actually if we look at the general flow of this song in contrast to the first starts with a really long progressive instrumental, then goes to the meat of the song and then wraps up, whereas this one starts with the verse chorus stuff. It is very lyrically focused at the beginning, and then we shift into a lengthy instrumental bit. It is the mirror opposite of the beginning. So I'm curious if lyrically we're going to be exploring anything like that. The only thing that disrupts this view of the writing of this song is that we do have the outro of the song that kind of disrupts that a little bit, as we have three parts to this track rather than two. But I'm just going to kind of disregard that, as the album and this duology of songs needs a finality to it. So they're eventually going to have to bring back some vocal ideas, speak about the story through the lyrics, and all that's going to have to rise to a peak to wrap everything up, not just this story, but the album as a whole. So it's more of a necessity of function that this has the outro that doesn't quite work with the idea of the mirror image of the first track. But I do find that to be really interesting, and it's almost as if we're on a journey where we have complexity to story, and then we go story to complexity, and it gives us this this mirroring of narrative across these two tracks. Speaking of that, like I said, the outro of the last track merges into the intro of this track, and I'm really curious how that works on the album. The two tracks probably work really well if you listen to the entire, like 26 minutes of it or whatever. But if you listen to it on the album, does it feel disjointed? Does the track before this one also end with some sort of airiness that would move into this one? And does track two introduce some of that airiness? Because track one's outro and track two's intro aren't tapered off. They're both starting above zero. So any track next to them, if they fade out completely or fade in completely, in track two's case, it's going to feel odd. But Dream Theater is definitely a band who thinks about nuances like this, and something tells me there is still fluidity within the album, which I think would be just wild, because these two songs are intended to be played next to each other as one big chunk, I'm going to assume, and then they're split up, and something tells me it's still going to feel natural to move between this album with this separation here. So yeah, I think that was one of the big positives, was all the callbacks and all the ways that the second part is tied to the first. I'm waiting until we get to some lyrics, and I hope there's some lyrical callbacks as well. Now, I gotta be a little critical here. This song, from start to finish, is jaw-dropping. Whether it's some of the really emotive, evocative atmospheres and vibes that they create in the more simpler ideas, or it's the sheer powerhouse technicality and chops that are required to play the ideas that we hear in the more progressive sound, there's nothing in here that isn't impressive on one level or another. But I'm curious if I'm the only person who really felt this could have been shortened up quite a bit. There was a good 2 minute chunk, maybe 3 minute chunk around the 11-minute mark of this song where I was thinking, okay, and can we move on? It was the really progressive section with all the weird time signatures, the instrumental part, the wild melodic riffs that went into the guitar solos, and just, again, technically really impressive. But as far as pacing for the song and narrative development, I really think this could have been shortened up by a couple of minutes. And in the grand scheme of things, you're like, oh, what's the difference between a 16-minute and a 12-minute song, or a 16-minute, 13-minute song? Yeah, we're not really shaving off that much, but if it tightens up the pacing, that's the important thing. I don't know. I'm sure there are metalheads And I mean, that's one of the big distinctions between, I think, me and traditional metal listeners is that metal listeners tend to really enjoy vibes and riffs. And those are the two things I have a tough time getting over. I'm more about storytelling. And storytelling, to me, pacing is a really strong part of that. I feel the rising intensity from the isolation of the beginning of the track building into the chaos of that instrumental part. Chaos not just with the wild time signatures, but all of the layers and the 16th note shredding on the guitars and like all that really cool showmanship stuff going on there. It absolutely works for selling the chaos. I don't think that that's the problem. It just goes on too long. For me, anyways. Which I think is also wild because usually that's because I'm getting bored. I want it to be shortened to get to the next idea. But they were also changing ideas every 2 bars. The drum work would completely shift. The chord progression, the key, the mode would shift every 2 bars. The guitar riff would constantly be in motion. It's not something you can really get bored with, and yet I was ready for it to move on. I think that's because the overarching theme of chaotic, high intensity, fast moving ideas was just becoming too much. I kind of liken it akin to an action film where the action sequence is well done. The stunts are fantastic. The choreography is great. The entire scene is intense. It's shot well, but it's just gone on for too long. I've hit at my peak for a length of time that's kind of making me fatigued. I'm ready to dip down to catch that breather, and the art isn't. Maybe that's intentional. Maybe I'm supposed to want to be done with this. I am becoming fatigued just as much as possibly the character in the story is. But it could also be a case of poor pacing. Things could be tightened up a little bit. And I think the repetition of ideas too, where we frequently came back to this one riff. We would go and explore a bunch of stuff and return back to this home mode, and then explore a bunch of stuff and return back to this home. Um, and it just got to a point where it's like, okay, I get it. It's high intensity. What comes next, though? And I was really happy to hear what came next. I think the final 3 or 4 minutes of the song were absolutely fantastic, not just in their writing in isolation, which I do think that that pocket of music is still fantastic on its own, but as a finale to the previous 20 minutes of music that came ahead of it. The building up into all of this, the tired, weary, beaten victory that we hear that eventually turns into where we are about to hit the high point, the full chordal resolution to show utmost rest. It gets turned into something with tension that is still pointing somewhere else. We aren't fully resolved chordally, and this is where the vocals kick in and we get the final, like, what, 2 minutes of music or whatever, and that twist from finality to there's more is amazing. I can only assume that the demon goes back on his word or whatever, or maybe the whole idea of eternal life and servitude. He's completed his task of revenge, but he is still the hitman of this demon, or, however the story goes. I don't know. We'll find out about that in the lyrics a bit. But I assume that that's what it's trying to showcase there emotionally, and I think it does a fantastic job of that. One task is over, but there's still eternity ahead of you. The negative, the downside of taking this deal. Everything about this works so well, and maybe I even feel better about it because I was so ready to get out of that last section. But again, I just feel like something about it could be shortened just a hair bit. I'm sure, I don't know. I wear my emotions on my sleeve, right? There are times when I'm like super locked in on the critical side and my whole reaction is just, and I'm like trying to digest it all. But a lot of the times I see comments, hey, I like your analytical stuff, but dude, you got funny faces. And I'm sure I wore that during that section too. There's no way, because I was getting fed up with it, honestly. And it's really the only blemish on this, and it's something that I've come to learn about Dream Theater as well. They are fantastic story writers in music. I think they do a great job at showcasing how you can use music to fully embody a story, at least in the few songs I've heard from them. They're also really great at writing classically with ideas of counterpoint and polyrhythm and motif, reprises, recurring ideas. I mean, they're just really great composers, but I mean, when we checked out Dance of Eternity, that was pretty much just me talking about how it was technically impressive, but not a great song to me. At least if I remember my reaction to that correctly. And this middle section reminded me of that. Dream Theater can be absolutely fantastic at times, but they can also be very overboard. And that was a moment for me of them going just a hair bit too far and not really reining it in and doing it more for them than for the music. It's not something they always fall into, but it is something that I found they have consistently fallen into. And yeah, that's where I sit on this one. Excellent, fantastic music from top to bottom, and just one little 2-minute issue with it that I think I could have done without. But the ending absolutely nails everything, and I wouldn't want to change anything about it, especially since, as I stated, my fatigue in the middle of this song actually made me happier to get to the ending and probably elevated my experience with it. And I was supposed to make another section about how the ending works narratively, and I kind of worked that into that last segment. So, yeah, I guess only 2 timestamps for this analysis segment. Let's run into some lyrics here, see what's going on with the ending of the story, and then we'll wrap this video up. Well, that's a peculiar twist. This is broken up into 4 movements. The first movement, Heretic, is sort of a revisiting of what we saw in the first song. It is the moment, or maybe the ritual, of giving his soul up to this demon. In the chorus, we even have the mantra, Dark Master within, I will fight for you, Dark Master of sin. Now my soul is yours, Dark Master, my guide, I will die for you, Dark Master inside. And of course, the that growled line, "My soul is yours, Dark Master. I will fight for you," that popped up a couple of times in the song. And he talks about this Dark Master. He says, "I can't see his face. I could feel his spite, though. His shadowy will, it consumes me from within. There's a power within me now and a spirit sealed inside." This moves into movement 4, the slaughter of the damned, which is where he is told to go kill all of these angels. And so he does. He's told that you won't have to find them, they'll be coming for you. We get an inversion of the Lord is my shepherd Bible verse that speaks about not having any fear, and my cup is overfloweth, although with enemies' blood. And at the end of this, though, he realizes he's fallen. He used to be a man of faith, and now he has sold his soul to a demon. And so we have a a movement called Salvation. Movement 5, The Reckoning, is the instrumental break. And yeah, that's just chaos. That is the battle of within, trying to figure out who he is as a person. Is he a man of faith, or is he a man who allows demons to control him so that he can get revenge? And so the final few stanzas say, "My soul grows weaker, he knows and he waits, he watches over me, standing at the infernal gates. In the hour of darkness, the moment I feared has passed, the moment I lost my faith, promising salvation. My soul is my own now, I do not fight for you, Dark Master." and then the song ends. I wonder, it doesn't make for a very good story because because there's no tension. If you could just tell a demon, "Oh, you know that blood pact that we made? Yeah, I mean it's null and void. I ripped it in half, so my soul's my own now." Like that demon's gonna be pretty mad. And maybe part five, the reckoning, is supposed to be this battle between them, but I don't know. Because in movement four, the slaughter of the damned, when he's killing all of these angels, it ends with servants of the fallen fight to pave the way for their savior's calling on this wicked day. Through a veil of madness with a vicious blade, one man rises up, standing in their way. It's time for your reckoning. At that point, I view movement five, the reckoning, as the battle with these enemies following his dark master's wishes. And then out of that he just says, "Nah, actually I did what you wanted and I'm just taking my soul back." And I don't know, that feels a bit undercut to me. That's not a good way to end a story. Maybe I'm reading this incorrectly. Maybe there's a detail in these lyrics I'm missing. It doesn't ruin the music for me, but it is kind of a weird little detail here at the end. I don't think that the story necessarily comes together too strongly. Although something else that I read that kind of, I don't know, didn't really work for me. Or was it? There was an annotation about something Petrucci had said. I think that's his name. Yeah. It says, according to Petrucci, the song is metaphorical, and the grand battles depicted in the lyrics happened in the person's head. So it's a battle of the good and evil within, which makes the ending feel a bit better. But it's also interesting how part one feels very adapted from the Korean comic Priest, and this feels like a vague connection to it in a way that part one can certainly go into part two, but that they feel like they have different inspirations or different goals in their execution. So I'm kind of curious. Is this based off of Priest, as I read in the part one annotation, or is this just a typical good versus evil, metaphorical, fight for the soul within kind of thing? I don't know. I feel like the adaptation of the comic is a much cooler idea than just making another song that uses a war of angels and demons to metaphorically showcase the humanity of a person. That feels a bit more trite, and it also, I think, undercuts the story a bit. But if we do go based off of it being more of a adaptation of the comic, I feel like the ending undercuts that a little bit lyrically. So it's not really perfect either way, unfortunately, for me. But musically, I'm still 100%, 99% sold on it. That movement 5, it's something. Anyways, this is getting quite long. Those are my thoughts. Dream Theaters in the Presence of Enemies, Part 1 and 2. Let me know what you thought of these tracks, if there's anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I said, or correct me on, or just give me your own isolated thoughts, opinions, and perspectives on these tracks, even if they have nothing to do with anything I brought up. I'm always interested in other people's views on arts. I am nowhere near some sort of authority on music. I just have a pretty good read on a lot of stuff. And I'm always open to hear how other people interpret art. So please toss all that stuff down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you to a menu that looks like this. My brain went blank first. I was like, what does it take you to? Yeah, a menu that looks like this. And you can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell, I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. We're going to check out some... No, another one of these, right? I don't know. No, I don't think so. Tomorrow we're going to listen to a special selection and some brand new music. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.